Cathy Engelbert is cooked. Well done. Put her in the air fryer and forgot about her. Put her in the oven and left her in 30 minutes too long. Cathy Engelbert is cooked.
What happens when one of the league's most respected stars steps up and exposes the very foundation of the WNBA? That's exactly what Napheesa Collier just did, and her words didn't just rattle fans, they shook the entire league office. For years, complaints about poor officiating, dangerous physical play, and players being undervalued were brushed aside.
She's finished. If there is a league for 2026, Cathy Engelbert's not going to be in charge of that league. If I'm Adam Silver, for negotiation purposes, I am taking Cathy Engelbert away from the negotiation tables as soon as possible if Adam Silver wants a league.
But now, Collier has had enough. After suffering an injury that sidelined her during a critical playoff series, she used her platform to drop a bombshell on Commissioner Cathy Engelbert and the WNBA itself. This wasn't just frustration, it was a full-blown indictment of leadership. Collier accused Engelbert of dismissing player safety, ignoring accountability, and even telling stars like Caitlin Clark to be grateful for scraps. And just like that, the debate changed. The question isn't whether the WNBA has problems, it's whether the commissioner herself has become the biggest problem.
If they don't remove Cathy Engelbert from negotiations with the new CBA conversations coming up, that speaks volumes into how desperate the NBA is into kind of keeping this WNBA charade going.
Every movement has a breaking point, and for Napheesa Collier, it came in the form of a rolled ankle. In a heated playoff game against the Phoenix Mercury, Collier went down with an injury that should have been just another unfortunate chapter in a grueling WNBA season. But this wasn't just about one player's misfortune. Her fall pulled back the curtain on a deeper issue that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. A league ignoring its stars, dismissing player safety, and hiding behind excuses instead of solutions.
If Napheesa Collier doesn't get hurt, roll her ankle, if she's able to finish out that series and the Lynx advance, or if she's just able to finish off that series, period, if that play never happens, what Cheryl Reeve said in the postgame, what Napheesa Collier said during her exit interview, none of that gets said. Only when it affects them, it turns into an issue.
For months, fans had been shouting about the brutal treatment of Caitlin Clark, who was repeatedly targeted with hard fouls, cheap shots, and overly physical play. The league brushed it off as part of the gritty nature of women's basketball, telling critics to toughen up. Coaches waved it away, commentators excused it, and leadership acted like nothing was wrong.
When it was happening all last season with Caitlin Clark, getting beat up, getting targeted, getting abused, getting singled out. The game was physical. What do you expect? This is the WNBA. What do you expect?
But when Collier, an all-star, a veteran presence, and one of the faces of the league became the victim, suddenly, the silence shattered. Collier's injury didn't just sideline her, it exposed a double standard. For Caitlin Clark, the narrative was she adjusts to the physicality. For Collier, the narrative shifted to outrage. Coaches like Cheryl Reeve blasted officiating, teammates voiced concern, and the media finally echoed what fans had been saying all along. The WNBA had lost control of its product.
But now that it's happening to other players, it's not just Caitlin Clark's issue this year, she's been out. Now other players are dealing with it. Oh, now it's an issue. Now it's a problem. Now we need to speak out against the WNBA. Speak out against the commissioner.
What had been dismissed as whining when Clark endured it became a legitimate crisis once it hit a player with Collier's stature. That moment became Collier's turning point. She realized that waiting for leadership to step up was pointless. If players didn't demand change, nothing would ever change. And so, while nursing her injury, she began preparing a message that would go beyond the court. When she finally stepped in front of microphones, her words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored.
The real threat to our league isn't money, it isn't ratings, or even missed calls, or even physical play. It's the lack of accountability from the league office.
This wasn't a post-game rant. It was a carefully delivered address aimed directly at the league's most powerful figure. Cathy Engelbert. Collier made it clear that the injury was just a symptom of something much larger. The real disease, she argued, was the lack of accountability at the top. How could players trust a commissioner who dismissed officiating complaints as losers whining about refs? How could they believe in a league that profits off their talent but refuses to protect them from reckless play? The message was unmistakable.
Whether the league cares about the health of the players is one thing, but to also not care about the product we put on the floor is truly self-sabotage. Year after year, the only thing that remains consistent is a lack of accountability from our leaders.
The WNBA's leadership wasn't just failing, it was sabotaging the future of the sport. Her ankle injury might heal, but the damage to Engelbert's reputation would not. By daring to speak up, Collier cracked open a conversation that the commissioner had been trying to keep locked away. And the moment those words left her mouth, the WNBA's biggest controversy in years exploded into full view. Because Collier's speech wasn't just about her own injury, it was a signal flare, and the fallout was only beginning.
They've rolled out as talking points for the CBA as to why they can't pay the players what we're worth. That word is sustainability. But what's truly unsustainable is keeping a good product on the floor while allowing officials to lose control of games. Fans see it every night. Coaches, both winning and losing, point it out every night in pregame and postgame media. Yet leadership just issues fines and looks the other way. They ignore the issues that everyone inside the game is begging to be fixed. That is negligence.
When Napheesa Collier finally stepped up to the podium, it wasn't with the shaky voice of an emotional player caught up in the heat of the moment. It was with the composure of someone who had carefully chosen her words, fully aware that once she spoke, there would be no turning back. This wasn't a typical post-game interview or a routine press conference. It was a calculated strike, a message, aimed directly at the commissioner of the WNBA and the system she represented. Collier began by congratulating the Phoenix Mercury for advancing, a diplomatic touch that made clear her message wasn't about bitterness over wins and losses. Instead, she pivoted sharply. The real problem wasn't the scoreboard, it was leadership. Her tone was calm, but razor-sharp as she delivered the line that instantly went viral. The real threat to our league isn't money. It isn't ratings. It isn't even missed calls. It's the lack of accountability from the league office. That sentence landed like a bomb. For years, players had quietly murmured about officiating, about inconsistency, about how physical play often spiraled out of control. Coaches grumbled in post-game interviews, fans raged on social media, but the league's top brass brushed it aside as noise. Collier wasn't just repeating complaints, she was naming the disease at its core. Negligence from leadership, her speech hit harder because of the way she carried it. Unlike other players who fumble through written notes with shaking hands, Collier delivered her statement with poise and conviction. She looked like someone who had finally run out of patience. Someone tired of whispering in private conversations, tired of being told to sit down and be grateful. She was stepping into a role bigger than herself, the voice of the locker room. She outlined the issue clearly. Officiating had reached levels of inconsistency that plague our sport and undermine the integrity in which it operates. Fans saw it, coaches saw it, and players lived it every night. Yet instead of solutions, the league issued fines and hollow statements. To Collier, that wasn't leadership, it was self-sabotage. And then came the word that stung everyone listening: sustainability. The league had used that term for years to justify low salaries and slow progress, painting it as a noble goal. But Collier flipped the narrative. What's truly unsustainable, she declared, is keeping a good product on the floor while allowing officials to lose control of games. That line exposed the gap between the commissioner's polished talking points and the reality players lived every single night. Her words echoed far beyond the press room. Fans clipped the speech, shared it across platforms, and debated whether this was the most direct player attack on WNBA leadership in modern history. In a matter of minutes, Collier had shifted the conversation from on-court highlights to the very survival of the league itself. But as powerful as her speech was, it was only the beginning. The next revelations wouldn't just question leadership, they would directly expose Cathy Engelbert herself. If Napheesa Collier's speech opened the door, what she revealed next kicked it off its hinges. This wasn't just about officiating or injuries anymore, It was about Cathy Engelbert herself, the words she allegedly said behind closed doors, the mindset she carried into conversations with players, and the arrogance that left athletes feeling insulted rather than supported. Collier recalled a meeting earlier in the year at the Unrivaled event where she pressed Engelbert about the league's worsening officiating problem. According to Collier, the commissioner's response was nothing short of dismissive. Only the losers complain about the refs. That single sentence cut to the heart of the criticism players had been voicing. Instead of acknowledging flaws and promising reform, Engelbert brushed it off with a cliché that sounded more like a schoolyard taunt than a leader, addressing professionals. But it didn't stop there. Collier went further, revealing that when she asked about player compensation, particularly for young stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Bucher's, Engelbert allegedly told her Caitlin should be grateful for the money she makes off the court. She even went so far as to suggest that players ought to get on their knees and thank their lucky stars for the media rights deal that, in reality, was negotiated by NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. For players already frustrated by low rookie salaries and the league's slow growth, these words were gasoline on a fire. The idea that Engelbert took credit for Silver's deal, then spun it as a favor she had delivered, painted her as out of touch and self-serving. Instead of seeing players as the driving force behind the league's rising popularity, she cast them as beneficiaries of her supposed generosity. To Collier and many others, it was insulting. The optics were damning. While stars like Caitlin Clark had been drawing record crowds, selling jerseys, and driving television ratings, the message from the top was that they should be thankful just to be here. It was a mentality that revealed Engelbert's true approach. The league succeeds despite the players, not because of them. For athletes putting their bodies on the line every night, that kind of thinking was unacceptable. The allegations spread quickly online. Fans dissected Engelbert's alleged quotes, comparing them to infamous moments in sports history when leaders disrespected their stars. Critics pointed out that phrases like "on your knees" weren't just unprofessional. They exposed a commissioner completely disconnected from the athletes she was supposed to champion. The credibility Engelbert once had was slipping away with every replay of Collier's words, and this was the breaking point. The complaints were no longer about referees missing calls or games getting too physical. They were about Engelbert's leadership style, arrogant, dismissive, and tone-deaf to the very players who carried the league. Collier hadn't just accused the commissioner of negligence, she had painted her as the biggest obstacle standing in the way of the WNBA's growth. But the real question lingered. Would Engelbert fight back, or had Collier just sealed her downfall? If Collier's allegations revealed Engelbert's dismissive words, her broader message was even more devastating. The WNBA doesn't value its own stars. For years, players have sacrificed their bodies and careers to build a league that too often treats them as replaceable parts, rather than the foundation of its success. And in Collier's eyes, Engelbert had become the face of that failure. She contrasted Engelbert's coldness with examples of true leadership she had witnessed firsthand. Collier described how her husband, who manages a professional sports league, always finds time to personally reach out to players, sending a text, making a phone call, offering a word of encouragement whenever someone suffers an injury. To him, leadership wasn't just about negotiations and balance sheets. It was about showing humanity. It was about reminding players they mattered beyond the scoreboard. Engelbert, Collier revealed, hadn't even picked up the phone. Not a text, not a call, not a single word of acknowledgement after one of the league's brightest stars went down in a playoff series. The only response Collier heard came from Engelbert's number 2, who allegedly dismissed the entire incident by saying physical play wasn't contributing to injuries. For Collier, that was the final straw. Think about what that means. In a league where stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Breanna Stewart are drawing unprecedented attention, the commissioner couldn't even bother to send a 2-sentence message to one of her ousters. Instead, her office downplayed injuries as if they were nothing more than bad luck. It wasn't just tone-deaf, it sent a chilling message. The WNBA values the league's brand over the player's health. Collier called it what it was. Fans see the inconsistencies in officiating every night. Coaches call them out in press conferences. Players feel the effects with every bruise and rolled ankle. And yet, the leadership's solution has been the same year after year: fines for those who speak up. silence for those who demand change, and a stubborn insistence that the product is just fine. To Collier, this wasn't just about the pain of her own injury. It was about the cumulative effect of years of dismissals. Years of players being told to bulk up or stop whining. The league had framed physical play as a badge of toughness. But when it crossed the line into reckless danger, leadership turned away. That pattern, she argued, wasn't just unsustainable, it was sabotaging the very future of the sport. And that's why her speech resonated so strongly, because fans knew she was right. They had seen Caitlin Clark shoved to the floor with no call. They had watched Angel Reese take hits that would be fouls in any other league. They had seen injuries pile up and stars sidelined, only for Engelbert's office to shrug it off. Collier's message was clear. This league cannot thrive while ignoring the very players who make it worth watching. But as her words spread like wildfire, one question loomed larger than all the others. How would the WNBA respond? When Napheesa Collier's speech lit up the basketball world, the ball was suddenly in the WNBA's court. Everyone waited to see how Commissioner Cathy Engelbert would respond. Would she acknowledge the concerns, show humility, and promise reform? Or would she dig in her heels and dismiss the criticism? Unfortunately for the league, Engelbert chose the second path, and her statement only deepened the storm. The commissioner released a carefully polished response, beginning with praise for Collier and a reminder of how much the league had worked tirelessly to transform the sport. On paper, it sounded diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. She wasn't admitting to a single misstep. Instead, Engelbert implied that Collier had characterized their conversations in a way she didn't agree with. To fans and players, that sounded like a denial without accountability. It was as if Engelbert was saying, "You misunderstood me," while sidestepping the fact that multiple players had echoed the same frustrations. This response landed with a thud. To many, it confirmed the very criticisms Collier had leveled. Rather than addressing player safety, officiating standards, or dismissive remarks about salaries, Engelbert deflected the issue back onto Collier. Instead of leadership, it looked like damage control. Worse still, rumors began swirling. Did players have recordings of those private conversations with Engelbert? If they did, and if her alleged comments about losers complaining about refs or players needing to be grateful for scraps were ever released to the public, it would be Engelbert's Donald Sterling moment. The league could try to downplay Collier's accusations, but a tape would make denial impossible. Fans speculated online, urging players to drop the receipts. The trust gap between leadership and athletes widened by the hour. Meanwhile, the league office continued its old playbook: fines and silence. Coaches who criticized officiating were punished, players were warned, and executives issued vague statements about working together to elevate the game. But those words rang hollow compared to the raw authenticity of Collier's address. She had spoken with conviction. Engelbert responded with corporate spin, and then came another twist: Caitlin Clark's no comment. When reporters asked her about Collier's bombshell speech, Clark was reportedly available to give a statement, but the Fever and league PR shut it down. Fans were furious. How could the brightest star of the WNBA, the one player whose voice could amplify Collier's message louder than anyone else, be silenced in this moment? Critics accused the league of muzzling Clark to protect Engelbert, a move that only added fuel to the fire. Engelbert's refusal to confront the issues head-on created the exact opposite effect she wanted. Instead of calming the waters, her response magnified the outrage. Now, it wasn't just about officiating or one player's injury. It was about a commissioner who seemed incapable of facing reality. And as the backlash grew louder, the question hanging over everything became impossible to ignore. Had Collier's bombshell just triggered the beginning of Engelbert's downfall? When Napheesa Collier dropped her bombshell on Cathy Engelbert, all eyes naturally shifted to the player who has become the centerpiece of the WNBA's growth, Caitlin Clark. If anyone could validate Collier's claims and put overwhelming pressure on the commissioner, it was Clark after all. She has been at the center of the league's most controversial storylines all season: the hard fouls, the physical targeting, the media scrutiny. Yet when reporters finally asked Clark for her reaction to Collier's speech, the response stunned fans. She had no comment. At first, it sounded like Clark was simply choosing to stay out of league politics. But the more details emerged, the more fans questioned whether this silence was really voluntary. According to reports, Clark was available to give a statement, but Indiana Fever officials quickly shut it down. That revelation hit like a thunderclap. How is it possible that the league's biggest star couldn't speak her mind about the biggest controversy in years? This wasn't the first time Clark's voice seemed tightly managed. Throughout her rookie season, she had been limited in what she could say about officiating, even as fans watched her take brutal hits night after night. Interviews about her injuries and recovery were cut short. Questions about league leadership were redirected. And yet, the moment Collier's accusations threatened Engelbert's credibility, Clark was suddenly off limits. For many, it didn't add up. The league has leaned heavily on Clark's popularity to sell tickets, boost ratings, and dominate headlines. But when it came to allowing her a voice in a moment that could define the WNBA's future, the response was silence. To fans, it looked like Clark was being muzzled. Her platform controlled to shield the commissioner from even greater embarrassment. This sparked outrage across social media. Fans blasted both the Fever and the league for treating Clark like a marketing tool instead of a player with her own agency. Some argued that Clark's silence wasn't just damaging her credibility, but also undermining the very movement Collier had started. If the most high-profile star couldn't speak freely, how could anyone else? The optics were terrible. Here was Collier, risking fines and backlash to speak truth to power, while Clark, arguably the player with the most leverage in the league, was sidelined by her own team and leadership. It painted a picture of a league desperate to control the narrative at all costs, even if it meant silencing its biggest draw. And this only fueled speculation. If Clark had been allowed to speak, what would she have said? Would she have backed Collier publicly, putting Engelbert in an impossible position? Or would she have stayed neutral, risking backlash from the fans who believe she has been the biggest victim of unchecked physical play? By silencing her, the league may have answered that question itself. Because whether Clark intended to or not, her forced silence became another indictment of Engelbert's leadership. And if the commissioner thought keeping Clark quiet would kill the story, she miscalculated badly. Instead, it raised a darker, more dangerous question. If Cathy Engelbert is willing to muzzle Caitlin Clark, what else is she willing to do to keep her grip on power? By the time the dust settled on Napheesa Collier's speech and Caitlin Clark's forced silence, the pressure cooker around Cathy Engelbert's leadership was reaching explosive levels. For years, frustrations about officiating, salaries, and the league's stagnant growth had been whispered behind closed doors. But now, those whispers were broadcast publicly, amplified by players, coaches, and a fan base that felt deceived. The league wasn't just facing criticism, it was staring down an uprising. Collier's courage opened the floodgates. Other players began hinting at similar frustrations, liking posts online that criticized Engelbert and subtly backing Collier on social media. Coaches like Cheryl Reeve had already fired shots in press conferences about officiating failures. The message was clear. This wasn't just one disgruntled player. This was a movement gaining momentum. For the first time in years, WNBA leadership looked like the minority voice in its own league. The fans, meanwhile, weren't staying quiet. On Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit, Collier's speech spread like wildfire. Clips of Engelbert's alleged losers complain about ref's comment were shared thousands of times. Memes ridiculing the "get on your knees" line became rallying cries for change. Hashtags calling for Engelbert's resignation began trending among WNBA fans, spilling beyond the basketball world and into mainstream sports conversation. Even casual followers who only tuned in for Caitlin Clark now saw Engelbert as an obstacle to the sport's growth. The parallels to past sports scandals were impossible to ignore. Commentators drew comparisons to the downfall of disgraced NBA owner Donald Sterling, whose racist remarks, once made public, forced the league to act swiftly. The difference here was that, instead of tapes surfacing, it was Collier's credibility as a respected veteran that gave her words undeniable weight. If she was willing to risk fines and her relationship with the commissioner to speak out, how bad was it really behind the scenes? As pressure mounted, the conversation shifted from frustration to action. Fans demanded accountability. Analysts began speculating about succession plans, who could realistically replace Engelbert if she were removed. Names like Swincash and Tamika Catchings, former players with executive experience, began circulating online. Suddenly, Engelbert wasn't just being criticized, she was being replaced in the court of public opinion. And that's where the NBA's shadow loomed large. Adam Silver's name started popping up more frequently in conversations, with many pointing out that the WNBA's survival depends heavily on NBA financial backing and structural support. If Silver viewed Engelbert as a liability, her days might already be numbered. Collier had managed to do what no one else could: unite players, fans, and critics against the same target. Engelbert's carefully crafted image as the league's visionary was crumbling, replaced by a narrative of arrogance, neglect, and tone-deaf leadership. The calls were no longer about improving officiating or boosting player pay. They were about removing Engelbert entirely. And with the pressure mounting from every direction, it became clear her fate might not be in the players' hands anymore. It could come down to whether Adam Silver decides to pull the plug. But if he doesn't, the WNBA may be facing an even bigger crisis than anyone expected. As the storm raged around Cathy Engelbert, one name kept resurfacing in every debate: Adam Silver. The commissioner of the NBA isn't just the most powerful figure in basketball, he's also the lifeline of the WNBA. The league's survival depends heavily on NBA funding, media rights deals, and Silver's willingness to keep it afloat. That's why Collier's speech didn't just put Engelbert under the microscope, it forced Silver into the spotlight. The timing couldn't be worse. Collective bargaining negotiations are looming, with players demanding fairer salaries, stronger protections, and meaningful reform on officiating. Collier's comments exposed Engelbert as a weak negotiator who takes credit for Silver's work while dismissing player concerns. If she remains at the table for CBA talks, players may not even show up. The trust is broken. A league that already struggles to gain mainstream traction cannot afford a labor war sparked by its own leadership. For Silver, the dilemma is clear. Keep Engelbert and risk alienating the very stars driving the WNBA's newfound popularity. Or remove her and admit that his hand-picked commissioner has failed. It's not just about Collier's speech anymore, it's about survival. If Engelbert stays, sponsors may hesitate, fans may walk, and players may bolt for rival opportunities like athletes, unlimited or international leagues that actually value them. Whispers are already swirling that Silver is weighing his options. Could he install a former player like Swin Cash, who commands respect in both locker rooms and boardrooms? Could a figure like Tamika Catchings, a Hall of Famer with executive chops, step into the commissioner's chair and restore credibility? The fact that names are being floated at all speaks volumes about how far Engelbert's stock has fallen. But what happens if Silver hesitates? That's the nightmare scenario. If Engelbert survives this wave of outrage, it won't calm the waters, it will pour gasoline on them. Players will see it as proof that leadership doesn't care. Fans will see it as proof that change is impossible. And the league will head into its most crucial years of growth, divided and disillusioned. The narrative will no longer be about Caitlin Clark breaking records or Angel Reese drawing crowds. It will be about a league sabotaged from within. For decades, the WNBA has battled to prove its legitimacy. Now, ironically, its biggest threat may not be external critics or financial hurdles, but its own leadership. Collier's words made that reality unavoidable. We have the best players in the world. We have the best fans in the world. But right now, we have the worst leadership in the world. The decision rests with Adam Silver. Does he step in, remove Engelbert, and give the league a chance to reset? Or does he stand by her, knowing full well that the players and possibly the sport itself are ready to revolt? Because if Silver chooses wrong, the WNBA's future beyond 2026 may not even exist. Napheesa Collier's speech wasn't just another post-game soundbite, it was a turning point. For years, players whispered about poor officiating, unsafe play, and leadership that dismissed their concerns. But Collier dragged it into the spotlight, putting Cathy Engelbert's leadership on trial for the entire world to see. Her words struck a chord because they exposed what many already felt, that the WNBA's growth is being held back not by talent or fans, but by arrogance at the very top. Now the league sits at a crossroads. Do players continue to fight for change from within, or will Adam Silver step in and make the decision himself? One thing is certain, the players have spoken, and they won't be silenced again. The WNBA's future may depend on whether it listens to its stars or continues to ignore them, and the clock is already ticking.